Warsaw, September 1939. A woman stands in her kitchen holding a ration booklet the government printed 3 days after the invasion began. She has 4 children. The youngest is 2. The booklet promises 800 calories a day, less than half what a child needs to grow. Outside, the bakeries are already empty, not because the bread ran out, because the flour did, because the mill stopped, because the trucks that carried grain couldn't get diesel, because the diesel went to tanks. She didn't see it coming. Nobody told her that a military campaign 300 kilometers away would drain her kitchen within 2 weeks. That's not a story from a history book. That's a mechanism. And that mechanism is running right now. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how conflict transforms into empty plates, why it follows the same sequence every single time across 100 years of history, and the 5 things that have actually kept families alive when the system collapsed around them. Let's talk about how food actually works before we talk about how it breaks. Modern food systems are not designed to feed people. They're designed to move food efficiently from one point to another with as little inventory sitting idle as possible. Just-in-time logistics. 3 days of stock in a typical supermarket, maybe 5 in a warehouse. The system is a river, not a reservoir. Now introduce conflict. Conflict doesn't need to directly bomb a farm to destroy a harvest. It just needs to interrupt one input, one critical node in the chain, and the entire sequence collapses downstream. Here's the chain, and it's been the same chain for over a century. War or geopolitical disruption, energy supply shock, agricultural production falls, transport breaks down, distribution collapses, prices spike, savings become calories. Every single major war-caused food crisis in modern history follows this exact sequence. Not most of them. All of them. Let me show you 3 examples separated by decades and continents, all running the same script. Germany, 1916 to 1917. The British naval blockade cut off imports to Germany. But here's what most people don't know. The famine wasn't just about blocked ships. The German army had requisitioned copper for shell casings and industrial war production. Copper was also the base ingredient for fungicide. Without fungicide, potato blight swept through the harvest. Roughly 50% of the potato crop failed. The civilian ration fell to around 1,000 calories per day at its lowest point. Half of what an adult needs, a quarter of what a laboring adult requires. The winter of 1916-1917 became known as the Steck-Reuben winter, the turnip winter, because turnips, normally used as cattle feed, became the primary food source for millions of German civilians. Historians estimate between 400,000 and 700,000 German civilians died from malnutrition and related disease during the blockade years. Leningrad, 1941 to 1944. The Wehrmacht encircled the city in September 1941. By November, the bread ration for non-working civilians had dropped to 125 grams per day. Roughly 3 thin slices, approximately 300 calories. The city needed a minimum of 800 tons of food per day. It was receiving less than 500. People boiled leather belts for protein. They scraped wallpaper paste off walls because some pastes contained potato starch. The city's zoo animals were slaughtered and rationed. Then household pets. Official Soviet records document over 800,000 civilian deaths during the siege, though some historians estimate the figure was significantly higher. Roughly 100,000 people were dying per month at the height of the blockade. Yemen, 2015 present. The Saudi-led coalition's naval blockade restricted fuel and food imports into one of the world's most food import-dependent nations. Yemen was already importing approximately 90% of its staple grains before the conflict. The result was not empty shelves. It was full shelves that the population could not afford. Fuel shortages made water pumping, food transport, and cold storage impossible. UN agencies have documented one of the worst humanitarian food crises since World War II, with millions classified as facing emergency or catastrophic food insecurity. The cruelest detail, the food existed. It sat in markets. Families could see it. They simply could not pay for it. Same chain, different century, different geography, identical mechanism. Here's where history stops being academic. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical maritime choke points on the planet. Roughly 20% of global oil trade passes through it, but oil isn't the only thing. The raw materials for nitrogen-based fertilizer, ammonia, urea, move through that corridor, feeding agricultural systems across South and Southeast Asia. A disruption to that flow doesn't show up in food prices next week. It doesn't even show up next month. It shows up at harvest. Fertilizer doesn't create crops, it multiplies them. Remove nitrogen fertilizer from modern agriculture and yields on most staple crops, wheat, rice, corn, fall by 40 to 60%. That's not a shortage, that's a famine trigger. And unlike oil, there is no strategic fertilizer reserve. No country in the world maintains a meaningful emergency stockpile of nitrogen fertilizer. It's produced continuously and consumed continuously, with almost no buffer. Spring planting doesn't wait for geopolitical resolution. Fields that go into the ground without adequate fertilizer in March and April produce less food in September and October. That math is already locked in for some regions. Meanwhile, the average American grocery store operates on roughly 72 hours of inventory. Every stage of restocking, from farm to warehouse to shelf, runs on diesel. Fuel rationing doesn't just raise prices at the pump, it means delivery trucks don't run on schedule. It means cold storage runs intermittently. It means spoilage. It means what took 3 days to restock now takes 3 weeks. If it happens at all, the mechanism is not hypothetical, it's historical, and the inputs are in motion. History is not just an autopsy, it's an instruction manual. Across every food crisis we just discussed, the same 5 factors determined who made it through and who didn't. Strategy 1, productive land. This is the most consistent finding across every crisis I've studied. In World War I Germany, rural families with kitchen gardens and small livestock ate through the turnip winter. Urban industrial families did not. During the Dutch hunger winter of 1944, when German forces blocked food supplies to the occupied Netherlands, causing approximately 20,000 deaths, survival rates were dramatically higher in rural agricultural areas. The urban death toll was severe enough that tens of thousands of children were evacuated from Amsterdam to farming communities in the countryside. The countryside had food because it produced food. It wasn't on a supply chain, it was the supply chain. Farmland has a unique property among assets. It cannot be devalued by currency collapse, rendered worthless by inflation, or disrupted by a supply chain failure overseas. It produces calories, regardless of what the central bank does. Strategy 2. Stored food. By 1944, approximately 75% of American housewives were canning food at home, averaging over 160 jars annually. Victory Gardens, over 20 million of them, produced roughly 40% of all fresh vegetables consumed in the United States that year. These weren't farms. They were backyards, rooftops, vacant lots, window boxes, urban families growing and preserving food because their government told them to and because their grandparents remembered what happens when they don't. Here's the distinction that most people miss. A demand shock, where everyone tries to buy at once, empties shelves for days. A supply shock, where trucks can't get fuel to restock, empties them for weeks or months. 3 months of stored food isn't a prediction about how long a crisis lasts. It's a buffer that buys you time to adapt before panic and empty shelves make rational decision-making impossible. Strategy 3. Community networks. During World War I, Germany operated over 2,000 public soup kitchens across hundreds of cities. Hamburg alone distributed 6 million food portions in a single month at the crisis peak. These systems didn't materialize from nowhere. They were built on pre-existing community organization. During the Leningrad siege, survival correlated strongly with social connection. Shared kitchens, neighbors combining ration allocations, scientists working to develop edible substitutes from birch bark and cellulose. During the Dutch hunger winter, community cohesion was so strong that historians specifically credit it with preventing the kind of social breakdown seen in other besieged populations. The city functioned. People shared. The Netherlands did not descend into chaos at 370 calories per day, and the reason was that people were organized. Your neighbor isn't competition. Your neighbor is infrastructure. Strategy 4. Hard assets for trade. When currency loses purchasing power faster than food prices rise, which happens in every sustained food crisis, paper money stops working as a medium of exchange. Barter takes over. And history has documented exactly what trades. During the Dutch hunger winter, urban residents walked days into the countryside carrying jewelry, watches, silver, and antiques, a gold ring exchanged for a sack of potatoes. During the Soviet wartime black market, which historians estimate handled up to a third of all food transactions, farmers refused paper rubles and accepted physical goods. In every case, 3 groups accumulated resources during food crises: those who controlled agricultural production, those who controlled distribution, and those who held tangible assets. Gold, silver, and durable goods function as stores of value precisely because they aren't the currency that's inflating. Paper money fails during food crises because paper money is what's losing value as food prices rise. That's not speculation. It's the documented exchange rate of desperation across a century of crises. Strategy 5. Skills that produce value. A physician in wartime Leningrad received food in exchange for medical care. A mechanic kept vehicles running and received food from transport operators in return. A woman who knew fermentation, preservation, or herbal medicine had something neighbors needed and would exchange food to access. In Leningrad specifically, Soviet records document over 1,200 murders in the first 6 months of 1942. People killed for their ration cards. A card meant survival. No card meant slow starvation. The people who held no tradable skills, no tradable assets, and no community relationships had one option: stand in a queue and hope the allocation held. skills that produce things people urgently need, medical, mechanical, agricultural, preservation, function as a second currency when the first one fails. The 9 scientists at the Vavilov Institute in Leningrad maintained one of the world's largest seed banks, over 200,000 samples of wheat, rice, corn, legumes, and other staple crops. When the siege began, they could have eaten those seeds. Some of those scientists were starving, some died of hunger. They chose not to eat the collection because they understood something that's easy to miss when you're rationally fed and comfortable. Food is not just calories. It is the foundation of every other system human civilization runs on. When food fails, everything built on top of it fails with it. Medicine, governance, social order, family structure. The scientists preserved those seeds because they understood that the future would need them, and they were right. The woman in Warsaw in 1939, the mother in Berlin in 1917, the families in Leningrad in 1942. None of them chose their circumstances. The mechanism arrived, and they were inside it. What separated the ones who made it from the ones who didn't wasn't luck or strength. It was preparation, community, and skills, accumulated before the crisis began. The chain is mathematical. The outcome, once the chain starts, is largely determined by inputs that predate the crisis itself. The only variable that remains open is you, and what you do before the chain closes.